Welcome back to another episode of Practice Underwater. This is George Reary. I'm here with my co-host for today, Dr. Macarino. How's it going, man?
Co-host for today and always.
And always.
No worries.
And did you notice how I used doctor?
I didn't
I think
notice.
we need to tell the story. So Matt has a pet peeve. So he got invited to a wedding from his sister, and on the invitation says Mr. and Miss Matthew Carino. Mm-hmm. So for him, they messed up that there's no doctor. Mm-hmm. And then for his wife, Ellen, they put no Mrs. Mm-hmm. And Matt's sister really messed up this invitation. And I thought it was hilarious that he got annoyed by being called Mr. Carino, because I never thought it'd bother me, because I always go by George. Like most people that know me, I go by George. I never go by Dr. Hariri. Unless I'm in the practice, I go by Dr. George. And I got called Mr. Hariri the other day. And like last week, and I did not like it at all. It just felt improper. I'm either Dr. Hariri or George or Dr. There's no situation where Mr. Hariri, this person knows my occupation. Mm-hmm. They know what I do. It was inappropriate.
Yeah. In a somewhat formal setting, you need that doctor. And a wedding invitation is one of the most formal things you'll have on a regular basis. So
I never thought I'd be with you on this. Dr. Carino, I'm right there with you.
That makes me feel so good.
But now we're going to go back to George and Matt. I'm not going to keep doing that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, amongst us, we're good. But
all right. So this is an interesting one, Matt. I think this is correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. This is the very first time we have a converted specialist to GP office on the show.
It is. And I think it's also the first time we have a sibling buying a practice with her sister.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
We have two sisters. So we have a lot of firsts today. It's also the first time I've ever heard of the concept of I've heard of the concept of a specialist buying a GP office and doing the GP work and the specialty work. This is the first time I hear of the opposite situation. A GP buying a specialty practice. So these sisters, these GP sisters, bought a perio office, which... I mean, on the surface, actually, let's just kind of get our initial thoughts on this whole idea in this intro. What are your thoughts just on the whole idea of this in general?
The idea I'm good with. I think the part of the execution of they don't do the procedures that the perio did. They don't place implants at all. So that's a bit ambitious. It kind of goes against one of our major philosophies of buying an office. You can at least replicate the production. That's definitely not what happened here. But on the surface, I'm totally good with it.
You know what? There's a lot of pre-owner thoughts here. Let's get them out in the intro. Mm-hmm. That way our audience is like, look, let's just call a spade a spade. We are not on board with the concept of GPs and specialists buying each other's practices. Mm-hmm. Like GPs buy GP offices, specialists buy specialist offices. So I feel like listening to this episode, it's a little bit of a, thorn, kind of sticking out at you of like, this fact that they bought this GP, GPs bought a perio office, and a lot of the struggles they're going through are because of that. So let's just talk about it now, and then we can sort of not address it again in the outro later, and we could talk about what they could do to tactically grow. So, Matt, from my perspective at least, I think if I'm looking at all the specialties, I think perio, no implants is tough.
Yeah.
I mean, like what procedures are you really doing? Like hygiene, I get the hygiene is stable there, but like perio, they don't have a high hygiene percentage. They don't have upsells in hygiene. They don't diagnose restorative treatment that often. It just seems odd to me. Do they do like regular dentistry now? It's some dentistry is being done, but I mean, like they just closed on it. So it's like, we don't really know yet.
Yeah. It's been 2 months. They do general dentistry there. They have a good amount of patients that go back to a general dentist to have those treatments done, just come for cleanings. And it's an extremely small office. I mean, it's 500 active patients. It's it's something that Suzanne goes into marketing a lot in these episodes, but they definitely need some growth in the patient base.
But the practice being small, I mean, it does 1 to 1.2, pre-COVID. So it's not like it's this small. I mean, I don't like this buy. I'll put it that way. Yeah. And the reason is it goes against our core philosophy of do not buy a practice where you cannot replicate the production. That is in and of itself the only reason why we don't like this practice is because, I mean, obviously the only reason we don't like the whole specialty thing is because it's just you can't replicate production because you don't have that clinical skill set.
Yeah. I mean, if this was a GP office, it was doing 1.2, it has 6 ops, and only one hygienist. Like and they got it for an extremely reasonable price. This would be a buy all day. But the Perio not replicating the production, it's not a buy in our shoes.
Do you remember the price that they paid for this practice?
Yeah, it was sub 400K.
Oh, 400K. Yeah, 400K. Yep. I remember that now. Awesome. Well, anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the longer intro. We'll change it up here, and then we'll get into the outro. We have some thoughts for you guys. Okay. Enjoy this episode with our two sisters that bought a Perio practice and are converting it to a GP/Perio hybrid. Real doc, fake name, Brittany.
Welcome to this week's episode of Practice Underwater. My guest today is a real doctor, and her fake name is Brittany. I want to welcome Brittany to our episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Brittany. I'm excited to hear your story today. How's everything going?
It's going well.
Good. So why don't we jump right in then? Tell us about your practice.
Well, my practice is a practice that my sister and I purchased. It's a perio practice that had general dentistry in it. And we just closed on it end of February.
Okay, so basically we are like 2 months into this, right?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about the team and how many ops you have, and a little bit more about the details of the practice.
We have 6 ops. We have about 4.5 team members. So 1 hygienist, 1 assistant, 1 float that goes front office, back office, and 1.5 front desk people.
Okay, so 1.5 assistants, 1.5 front office, and 1 hygienist. Is that correct?
I guess almost 2 assistants, but one of the assistants does front desk and back office.
Okay. Now, how many hygiene days? I know you said you have 1 hygienist. What does that equal to in terms of hygiene days?
She's there 4 days a week.
Okay. And then you said 6 ops. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, good. So now tell us a little bit about like the purchase and how that went and this transition, because it's so recent. So tell us about that story.
So we looked at this practice, I believe, in August. We put in an offer probably in September, and we were supposed to close in October, but that didn't happen. We were denied our loan, and so we had to find a different bank. And the seller lowered the purchase price for us because we almost gave up at that point, and she didn't want us to, so she lowered the purchase price. And we ended up closing in February. So it's been a very long process getting funding, and we purchased the condo that it's in as well.
Okay, so you have real estate as well as the practice. Yeah. Okay, all right. Now, what has been basically your challenges or struggles so far?
Well, the transition was really rocky. We have a very unique situation where the seller, I guess, was out of commission a couple weeks before closing. So we weren't able to have direct contact with her because she was sick. And so it was hard figuring out what to transition over, like what services, passwords, things like that. So I feel like we've been focusing on, figuring out what to transition over, what we needed to get. And we thought she would be here for some of the transition to help walk us through all of that, since this is the first time we're practice owners. So that part has been hard, and we've mostly been trying to keep everything the same. So all the staff that are in the office were her staff members. We did cut hours a little bit because we anticipated being a little slower. But just getting systems in place, has been tough for us. Just juggling everything, I think.
Mm-hmm. So how did that conversation go with the team as you're reducing their hours in the practice?
I don't think they were too happy about it, but we did explain, if we can get the schedule full, we can definitely increase the hours again. She was doing 4 10-hour days, and so we reduced it to 4 8-hour days.
Okay, so give us a little bit of financial context as well. What was the seller doing prior to the purchase on average?
On average, pre-COVID, I believe she was doing about 1 to 1.2 mil.
Okay. And so where do you feel like the practice is kind of targeted now currently?
Targeted, I'm not really sure. We were just expecting a big cut to at least 800,000 is what we're hoping for. Because she was perio, we have to cut some of the procedures that she was doing. We did hire a periodontist to come maybe once a month or so to try to do some surgeries. But it's not going to be at the capacity that she was doing since she was there full time.
Mm-hmm. So did she have a patient base per se? I mean, periodontists often have a hygiene department. So was she fostering that hygiene department?
I believe so. The hygienist was the hygienist that she had, and she was up to 4 days a week by the time we took over.
Okay. Were those 4 full days pretty much?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a little tough to keep her filled for the 4 days. From what I've heard from staff, she's more like 3.5 days, 3 to 3.5 days booked out easily. And then the 4 days is a little bit of a stretch.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we were even thinking maybe we have to reduce her hours, but we're not really sure yet. We just tried to fill the 4 days.
So why would we kind of take a step backwards? What would be the reasoning behind you deciding, well, she's 3.5 days full for the most part. Why would we reduce? Like you'd reduce another half day, you're thinking? Or give me a little bit of an idea what your thoughts are behind that.
Well, I guess when we look at the schedule and she has holes, we try to condense it. Like let's say she only has 4 hours booked out of the 8, we'll condense it to a half day. They're looking at the coming weeks. It looks like even one day maybe only had 1 patient. So we would just try to move that 1 patient to another day and cut that 1 day. We're just worried about cost. And, this is why we're calling, because we're not sure what we should be doing. Because we're worried we're going to pay her for a full day and we won't have any patients for her to see. That would it seems like a waste of money to us.
Okay, we'll address that a little bit more down the road. Okay, so new patient flow. Historically, that seems a little on the lower side. And, some months are higher, some months are lower. So what has been kind of your new patient flow on average since you took over?
It doesn't seem like a lot. I think the metrics were showing less than 10 a month. We haven't started marketing or anything like that yet. It's basically if patients find us through her website so far. And she does have current, I think, SEO in place to do that.
Okay. But, so when you purchased the practice, you purchased her URL, you purchased all of that as well. I noticed on the website, I don't necessarily see you and your sister as a focus on the practice. I still see her, and then a letter that she wrote,
yes,
about you guys. So basically, is there an opportunity for you to have still connected with her marketing company and at least had you guys on there so that people could find you?
Yes. If you click to the About Us, we are included on there, but we've been slow to update the website, which we that's probably one of the things that we need to do right away.
Okay. So ultimately, what's the vision for you and your sister in this practice? Like, what do you want to see this looking like down the road?
Of course, we want to see lots of new patients a month. We want to start seeing more kids, maybe add some sort of clear aligner ortho to the practice since she's not doing any of that. And of course, increase more of the general dentistry in the practice. So hopefully we're going to add some patients that way.
So when you say add kids, add Invisalign, and add patients that way, help me understand what that means per se. Like, is it internal referrals? Is it more of the external marketing? What are your thoughts?
I'm hoping it's a little of both. A lot of our patients, because it's a perio practice, they're a lot older. And so, telling them that we're able to see kids since they haven't seen many kids in the past, telling them to bring their families in. And then hopefully the external marketing with the SEO, will target kids more than the perio in the past.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, you and your sister looked into purchasing a practice together, that you knew this was a perio office. Just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what was the most attractive piece, or what was attracting you to this particular practice.
Yeah, we looked at a few practices. I think the reason it attracted us mostly was the price. It was, very cheap. It was listed at, I think, can I say the prices for it?
You sure can.
It was listed at 400,000. And with her collections at 1.2 million, it seemed like a really good deal. And when we toured, she seemed really nice, and she kind of sold us on it, saying that she had a lot of general dentistry, and a lot of patients are waiting to get their work done, but she only had an associate general dentist come in once or twice a week. And so she's like, there's a lot of unfound general dentistry on her existing patients. And so I think that kind of pulled us in, was the low price. And then she's a very good salesperson, it seems like.
So she kind of convinced you on the low-hanging fruit for you guys.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So are you feeling like you're in what we call the honeymoon phase right now?
Yes, I think so. We have a lot of finishing up her cases. So I think we've had a good amount of revenue, at least for the first month or two, based on like her current patients. But I think we're starting to see a slowdown now that those patients are finishing up their treatment. So we really need to get on getting more new patients now.
So why is it that this was kind of put on hold? Did you feel like you had a lot to start off with in terms of inventory in the practice, and you were going to kind of wait on that? I'm interested to find out. You do want to market, you do want to grow the practice, and it kind of is happening. Despite your desires to do this, it's kind of happening. And I feel like we're being a little bit on the reactive side, if I could say that, rather than on the proactive side. So what has been the pushback? What has been the, pressing the brake rather than pressing the pedal forward?
I just think we were overwhelmed when we took over. I don't think we ever thought we were going to be owners, to be honest. And now that we took over with all the headache, we almost feel mentally drained some days. And we split days, so I think we only have enough patients for one full-time dentist, if that. And so I do 2 days, my sister does 2 days, and then we both work associate jobs elsewhere. And so time is hard for us because we do have other jobs, and I'm sure that plays into it. And of course, I have kids at home. And so coming home, working outside of office hours is really hard because I want to be home spending time with the kids. And so I know we need to make the marketing and other things more of a priority. But at the end of the day, sometimes we're like, oh, we just kind of want to not think about the practice.
Sure, I get it. I get it. There's a lot of moving parts. Have you and your sister tried to, like, are you both pretty equal in terms of being able to contribute? I know that may be a sensitive subject. So are you able to both contribute to all the laundry list of things that you want to get done? And have you put a list together kind of to say, okay, your area of expertise here, I can take care of these things.
We have not put together a list, and that would probably help us. We kind of take it day by day and say, hey, can you do this? Or this needs to be done. And so we'll call each other on our way home or things like that. But it would be great to have a list and maybe assign duties. I know in the beginning we were worried. We wanted each of us to know exactly how to do everything in case one of us was out. So we're open to suggestions for that. I think that's why we called, because I feel like we need a lot of help.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you did call, because we are going to talk about a few areas here that I feel like are going to make a difference in at least guiding you guys in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And so that is, I think, first and foremost in terms of the list of things that have to get done. Mm-hmm. And a time frame for when those need to be done, and then assigning, like, okay, who's going to take this, what is our deadline when it comes to who's going to take care of this, and when is it going to be done, basically. And I think first and foremost, we're going to get out of the mindset of being reactive, because it sounds like when you are talking on your way home at the end of the day, it's almost like putting out fires all the time. And yes, that can really, really I get why the two of you are burnt out, because you feel like you're always in the reactive space and looking in the rear view mirror saying, okay, we got to take care of this, we got to take care of that. And not much is on the proactive end. And I feel like maybe you would feel in a much more positive space if you were able to have a list, have the time frame, have a couple of things that you want to accomplish, say this week, a couple of things next week, and then the two of you are lining things off the list and feeling better about your accomplishments, as opposed to always feeling like you're on the reactive side, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that sounds great.
Mm-hmm. So that would be kind of the first and foremost, And the other thing, we'll get into this more next week when we speak again, but just to kind of address the hygiene issue with, should we reduce her time? I would say don't do that. You will work on marketing and you will be able to fill that. And you want to make sure she's available for those new patients, especially if you're really altering the direction here of the practice. It used to be a perio practice. And so it's going to take some time to build that up. And marketing, of course, is one of those things on your list. So we'll talk more in detail about that on our next episode. But I kind of just wanted to also talk to the audience about that in case they're going to be thinking about this all week. Okay. So let's talk numbers a little bit again. So we said the seller was doing, she was doing about 1.2 in 2019. And then looks like in 2020, she did 1.1. And 1.17, and when I look at where we're headed after, let's say, a first quarter of this year, I know you guys only took over in February, but I'm looking at the first quarter of this year. You're at 1.1. So our monthly production is not extraordinarily low. You guys are doing about 100 a month. So what I want to get into is, it sounds like it's not, or correct me if I'm wrong, is this a money issue for the two of you, or is it more of a time issue for the two of you?
What do you mean by money issue or time issue? You mean about not getting?
So implementing some of these things that are going to help the practice grow, like investing in marketing, or not doing that initially. Was it more of a time concern, or was it more of a money concern?
I think it's a little bit of both. We did keep one of her marketing companies, so we kept some of her current like licenses and stuff. So there is one guy that still is doing the SEO. We just haven't maybe updated with him, but we pay him, I think, $500 a month, and then we're doing another $500 a month for Google ads. So we are putting the money in, but we were worried initially because it was a perio practice and there were so many moving parts that we weren't sure what we were going to produce as general dentists coming in. And plus, we are signing up with some insurance companies, and I think our fees are going to get cut quite a bit going in network with Delta and other insurance companies, because we're hoping that'll bring in new patients as well.
Have you worked with a company to negotiate those fees, or are the two of you trying to do that on your own?
We did hire a credentialing company, and they did negotiate some fees for us. Delta doesn't negotiate though, but for other plans, I think we're going through an umbrella company through our credentialer. So we've been having help.
Okay, so you are getting a resource. Okay, that's good. So as we look at what the practice is generating, do the two of you know what your break-even point is per month?
We do not. We calculated with our CPA when we took over based on the seller's P&L statements. I think our break-even was maybe $700,000. It's very high cost of living area, high rent, high HOA, high staff salaries.
Is that something the two of you measure on a monthly basis? Like that's a yearly or an annual rate, but do you look at that on a monthly basis? What is it costing you to run the practice?
We have not yet. So we were going to sit down and run our first quarter, at least what we have, since we also need to submit that to the bank for our loan, a quarterly P&L. And so we were going to sit down and look through all of that to do it. Do you suggest monthly instead of quarterly then?
So what I would like the two of you to know is exactly what it costs you to run this practice every month.
Okay.
And then, so if you said 700,000, if I just use that as a benchmark, that's about just under 60,000. So if we just say 60,000 is what it's costing you to run this practice, every dollar over and above that is, either profit or reinvesting that profit into the practice. So to me, if that's kind of a benchmark that you've been given, and the two of you are kind of looking at, I know all of the expenses, I know what it costs us. I don't get the sense that this is a money issue for the two of you in terms of what you can afford to spend on marketing. Okay. So I would say this, yesterday is when you should really look into who do you want to work with from a marketing standpoint, and what changes you want to make to the website, what Google AdWords, like really injecting both external and internal marketing. We'll talk about that again next week as well.
Okay.
Okay, so another question that I have for, and to help our listeners really understand as well, is you mentioned kids. Is one of you a pediatric dentist, or are you just trying to make this a family practice?
Yes, we're just trying to make it a family practice. We're both general dentists, but we do really like working with kids. My sister especially loves working with kids. So we were really hoping to get more kids in the practice.
Okay. And so the current patient base you said is on the older side. That's going to be important as well to gear your marketing to a different now clientele. Same area, just you want to attract a different patient base, right? You're looking for everyone. And so that would be something that I would make sure your marketing company really understands.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So at the end of the day, I know you said you wanted guidance. I want to make sure that this time for you is everything you want it to be. So is there anything special or particular that you want to make sure that we have on the list of things to address, to make sure that you get what you want out of today's time?
Well, basically what we talked about, if there's something urgent that we need to have done yesterday, like you said, we definitely want to know those things so that we can implement them today. If not within the next couple days, that would be great to help. Coming up with the list of things that we need to get done would be perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent. Well, I am so looking forward to getting into the nitty-gritty of everything on our next call. So in the meantime, stay tuned and we'll see you next week on another episode of Practice Underwater.
Thank you.
All right, we are back. Matt, can I have your initial thoughts on that interview? Having listened to it, what are some of the initial things that you took away?
Well, I think the first one was being a bit confused about how they were on track for 1.1 in the first 2 months of taking over the practice, given that they don't do the implants that the seller doc did a bunch, and the patient flow is extremely low. So I was at first confounded by that. I think we kind of, before we hit record here, we were talking that maybe that was kind of some holdover from the production from the periodontist, the seller. And she's starting to see a slowdown.
Normally when we look in dental intel, like we were in the episode, you can track, we look at the last few months. That's typically what we do with the client. We look at the last few months and then we sort of project, because our practices grow so quickly with our philosophy, we can't look at the last year to really see what the next year looks like. It doesn't really make sense. So we try to look at a 2 to 3 month split and no more than that. So Suzanne did that here and she saw it and then she projected it forward and saw that they're tracking for 1.1. The thing about this practice, which is different, which is why you and I don't think the projection, the way that we typically do it, will hold, is that these sisters bought a perio office where they cannot replicate the production the way that it's being done. So that $1.1 million tracking, like they said in the episode, we had a first 2 months of really great, but then it's going to kind of dwindle down from here because they're not diagnosing and doing those advanced procedures. They're just kind of collecting on the seller's production at the moment. So
yeah, and it was a bit confounding their motivation for buying this practice, and the things that Brittany pointed to were mainly that it was cheap, available, and she even said at one point the seller kind of sold her on it, kind of talked it up. And she pointed to there's some low hanging fruits of a lot of dentistry needed to be done, but it just seemed like a bit of a lack of vision going into a practice purchase, and will probably amount to, at least initially, slower growth, because they're really changing the trajectory of this practice to the GP. She said she wanted to add Invisalign and kids. They kind of want to make it a newer practice that I think will be a lengthier ramp up period than it would be for a normal acquisition.
So there's two things that you just said there that I want to touch on. One is the planning pre-acquisition. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about the strategies that this practice is using, right? One thing we talk about a lot is this rowboat-like analogy, where you have all of the oars on the rowboat rowing in the same direction. That's how we get the results that we get, is because we get momentum from everything being coherent. This is a really good example to illustrate the opposite of that. So we have a perio practice, right? So think of all the things that come with a perio practice. We want to add kids and Invisalign. None of these things are like each other. The patient also, that goes, go ahead.
Invisalign and perio, that's not a good match.
And kids Invisalign are not a good match. And kids and perio are not a good match. So
I didn't put that together until you just said it.
So we have 3 oars on our rowboat here. We're trying to row kids, Invisalign, and perio, all of which do not work to help each other. So we can project forward that our boat is not going to go very fast, right? So I want to explain this analogy in depth so people really understand, because this is a very core analogy to our analytics-based practice management philosophy that we talk about in our seminar in July. It's this whole concept of really working towards cohesion through every system of the practice. Every strategy we implement is rowing in the same direction. So let's go through each one of these independently. Perio, kids, Invisalign. So perio, you start with a perio strategy: implants, crown lengthening, increasing referrals, making your hygiene department more productive, and then converting GP procedures off of those perio patients and trying to get them essentially to switch their dentist from their periodontist to you so that they see one person, right?
Which,
like that's the goal.
She's already trying to do that.
Yeah. So that's the perio strategy. The Invisalign strategy doesn't work on the current patient base because the current patient base has periodontal disease, which is kind of a reason why you can't really do Invisalign super effectively. It's kind of contraindication. So we would have to get a new, young, healthy mouth patient base inside the practice. Now, the strategy for what's best for the perio practice is no longer what's best for this Invisalign strategy. So those two strategies do not sync together. Then to add on top of that, we now got to get kids in the practice. So, it's like triple the work. And when you have 3 times as much work that you're taking on, you can't put as much effort into each thing. So if they focused all their effort on making the perio practice as good as it could be, and just focused on all the strategies that are coherent with the perio model, implants, crown lengthening, maybe some tissue grafting, they get really good at these things. They convert their GP patients into full-time their practice. And then you get more, but they're not going to get referrals from now on. Right. No. That's the thing. The referral business is dead because now you're taking other GPs' patients. So you got to get a new way of getting new patients. So you're essentially taking a perio practice and converting it into a GP practice. In general, don't love the practice, but you have to go all in on the perio GP conversion. And then once you have the new patient flow and the hygienist, and you look more like a GP office than a perio office, then I'm willing to entertain Invisalign. And then once you have Invisalign, you got some younger moms coming in. Then I entertain the kids. But you got to take it in stepwise, and you got to have all of your oars rowing in the same direction. And it's impossible to do that if you're doing these 3 things at once: perio, Invisalign, kids. There's a lot of contraindications that are coherent throughout the whole three different things. So I felt like that was worth pointing out.
Yeah. Yeah, and their one way of dipping into the perio waters is having a once a month periodontist. Is kind of how they've tackled this.
It'd be like, the analogy here is a hygienist buying a GP office and having a GP come 1 day per week to do dentistry. Like, there's going to be a drop off in production because you're substantially cutting the hours for certain procedures.
Yeah. And the other thing with this practice too is sounds like a higher fixed cost a month. She pointed to $700K a year was her figure. She said maybe due to the high cost of living, who knows what, but kind of a big number to crack every month, especially when they need to start investing in growth strategies to basically change the trajectory of this practice and input a lot of new patient bodies into it. So,
and then do you notice how the pre-planning that is missing, we talked about it before, shows up right here, right? They bought this practice. The planning on the front end was buy this practice. Well, what was the reason? What was their objective? Was that it was cheap. So a cost savings approach to buying a practice. So if I bought a $400,000 practice versus a $1 million office, I'm saving $6,000 a month roughly in debt service. But I now have way too many fixed expenses because I bought an office that has high overhead. So it's actually trying to be cheap, and buying a cheap practice in purchase price actually has created a much more expensive monthly operations in fixed costs with production that they cannot replicate. So that whole, and so I think we're pointing to a lack of intentionality with each step of the plan, where you look at it and their vision, desires, clinical procedures that they like, types of practice they're looking for, all those things. There's not a lot of alignment in that. And I think it shows here with the kind of the situation they're dealing with now.
Yeah. And there's a good amount of scarcity coming out too. Like they both came in there and immediately cut hours and, goes through the hygiene opening thing where she, tries to condense. She sends the hygienist home when there's no patients on the schedule and all that. And I just don't know if the mindset of the 2 docs currently is the right one to push this forward where they want it to go. a lot of challenges ahead. I really hope she reaches back out and asks for some support.
So, you talk about the scarcity mindset, and I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. So, can you talk tactically? Help the audience understand. So they hear a lot of mindset work, and I want to try to get a little tactical with it so that they see what we're talking about. So when you say scarcity mindset and you talk about, how that shows up. So talk about the decisions she made as a result of the scarcity mindset, and then talk about the impact that had on the practice so that people can see the true impact of that mindset.
So in this regard, scarcity kind of meant like survival mode, and like felt like she was basically up against it. The monthly expenses are high, the revenue is not what we need it, the appointments are not being full. So what do I need to do? Out of like self-defense, I need to cut hours, and I get to pay people for less hours. So in the extent of it, that's only she did 2 hours a day, so 8 hours a week. It's not a ton of savings, but the effect of it on a staff member is a lot because they count on those hours. So the morale of the team gets affected. And then it's also kind of admitting defeat, admitting you can't try to fill those appointments, and you won't do whatever is necessary to do it. That more of a growth mindset, more of like I'm gonna get it done. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna get supported. I'm gonna use resources. Like I'm gonna invest. It's very much of like there's survival. This is how it's showing up in this.
So I want you to also understand. I want you to also explain from a cost perspective to our audience. Talk about the fact that there's like primarily fixed costs in this practice, the impact of cutting capacity by sending people home, what that does for the practice financially, and how bad of an idea that is for the practice financially. I think it's good. Can you hammer that home and help our audience explain? Because that's really the result of the scarcity mindset. The biggest financial result is now their fixed costs are the same pretty much, but their revenue capacity is so much less. So can you help our audience understand that concept?
Yeah, I mean, most of the costs involved with owning a dental practice is in fixed costs. Is staff being the biggest one, rent, services, things that accrue on a monthly basis. Non-fixed being more like lab and supplies, which don't impact much in the expenses of a dental office, month over month. So what they're attempting to do is lower their fixed costs, which technically they are, but they're not lowering it by much. What they're actually doing, the bigger effect is now they're lowering their capacity. Now there's 2 less hygiene slots per day, every day, that they're able to get filled. And if you've seen George's webinar from a month or two ago about the actual value of a hygiene visit and what that is being taken away, is huge and far outweighs any nominal savings in fixed costs a month based on staff salaries.
I love the use of the word nominal there.
Yeah.
I think it really puts it into perspective because everyone's so concerned about the dollar value of the cost, but when compared to the value, it's relatively nominal. We're not dismissing the cost. We're just saying relative to the impact, it's nominal.
Yeah.
And that scarcity mindset is looking at the nominal expense as opposed to the value that's lost from doing that decision.
Yeah, both dollar value and like morale value with the employee, which is something that we can't measure, but is also there.
And last thing I'll say on the mindset piece, just to kind of hammer it home, is anytime the data or the analytics are pointing to a very clearly best decision and somebody makes the opposite decision, it is usually due to their mindset. So in this situation, the analytics are very clearly showing that this was not the move to cut the hygienist. However, they did that because of their scarcity mindset. That's the impact of an improper mindset, is an inability to make the proper decision. And a healthy mindset will help you feel comfortable with the right decision. That's the difference.
And that being said,
go ahead.
Molly, talk in a second, but I do want to commend her for coming to us.
Yes,
she was having these feelings of like, she says it's more of a burden to own this practice. And like, I'm not, something's not right here. She reached out and asked for support from us on this show. So I do want to like commend her for coming for that. Cause she's basically starting the process of turning this around. So.
Absolutely. And I think that we talk so much on the podcast about practice ownership being a positive thing and being like this experience of, everything the way you want it and having complete control over your work life environment and all those things. The piece that we don't talk about as much, because typically when people follow our recipe, they typically don't have that feeling of a practice is a burden. But in this situation, because of all these like lack of alignment and sort of difficult situations and all these fixed costs and everything, the practice feels like a burden. And that is the last feeling I'd ever want any dentist to have owning their practice, is that they'd rather be an associate somewhere else, because you're essentially trapped now in a job that you don't like. Like that's worse than not. That's worse than any alternative, I would think, because you're trapped. So I think that, you know, this goes back to the benefit of doing it, the preventing this, but also coaching this practice could help this go away. The practice is a burden. It's not really the practice is a burden. It's all of the challenges on the practice are the burden, and those challenges can be relieved, and then the burden will be relieved as well.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, this was part 1. We had a lot of thoughts, and next episode will be Suzanne being more tactical with the practice on specific things that can be done to grow the office. So I hope that helps, and I hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. Thanks for listening to the episode of Practice Underwater. Matt, anything you want to say before we leave?
No, we'll see you all next week.
See y'all next week on another episode of Practice Underwater.